I'm sitting in the entrance to my retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art. Behind me is the first portrait I painted in 1967-68, a 9-foot-high self-portrait that embodies many of the issues that I will continue for the next 30 years. I wanted to make a big, aggressive, confrontational image that was so large it could not easily be scanned as a whole and suck the viewer right up close to it where, in a Brobdingnailian... Yes? Let me just keep going. Everything I make is from photographs, and everything for 30 years has been built incrementally. A work like the one behind me appears to be seamless, but in fact it's built out of individual units. I break down the photograph into small bite-sized pieces that allow me to concentrate on one piece until I slowly build a whole. In an act of extreme generosity, my sitters have lent me their image without putting aside their vanity, without knowing how I'm going to use it or how often I'll recycle it. These are my friends and my family and my fellow artists, images that matter to me and that are the subjects of my paintings in the same way that bottles were for Morandi or oranges were for Cezanne. I got to get the hell out of here. Well, I did a 1968 self-portrait because I was the only person in the room.
I came at a half stop on it. Can I see it more?
Okay, so that's further back than it was?
Yeah.
Okay. I sat myself in front of the camera and measured the distance between my head and the lens and tried to figure out where the focal length would be. On my right eye from the left. And actually, that's how I first, by accident, got some stuff in focus and some stuff out of focus. I decided that that might be an interesting thing to incorporate into the painting because I really wanted the artificiality of the photograph as an intermediary step between me and the painting. Okay. Shit. I can't hold it.
Yeah, I'll give you resistance.
See, that one's the best, except it doesn't have the white highlight. Yeah. Or the other thing is to go a little more turned around. I won't really know until I slide this further in on it anyhow. I'm tired of looking at myself. Why do I keep doing self-portraits? Once the grid is made, I have to see where the beat of the grid falls across the information. If it doesn't fall in an interesting way, it won't make for a very interesting painting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Even though I never can make a decision and I'm plagued by indecision in every other aspect of my life, once I get to the grid stage and I start laying them out, always one of them is more interesting than the other. Good. And this part of the white of the eye fills the upper left-hand corner of that, and the dot of the eye would be in the center of this one. This one.
At the White House, I'm Mara Lanson. Some officials think that the worst of the flooding may be through.
I never wanted to project an image on a canvas, And the only way to get a drawing on that was in proportion to the original and accurate was to grid it off. In the early paintings, I would remove the grid as I made the painting. Around 1970, I began to do works in which the grid remained part of the piece itself. Things are really falling in fortuitous positions. You know, it's funny because people think if you work from photographs that, first of all, everyone thinks it's cheating that you no longer have to look. But the other thing is you think once you accept a photograph, there's only one kind of picture to make from it. But all of these little subtle adjustments really make for a very different picture. Take advantage of the accidents.
Ready to start painting?
Okay, we'll put the tape on. Where are all those planks? Thank you. We didn't have very much money, and there weren't a lot of toys and things in during the war. So my father made me a bicycle from scratch, and he made me a little Jeep that I could drive around in. But it was a family that was supportive of the idea of me being an artist. For my 5th Christmas, my father made me an easel. And I saw in a Sears Roebuck catalog a set of genuine artist oil paints. And I wanted that desperately. I pleaded and begged, and I finally got this box of cheap oil paints. Long before I was physically disabled, I was learning disabled. I wasn't any good in school, and I wasn't an athlete. If I could have people around me, it was easier than for me to chase after other people. I did magic shows and puppet shows. For my magic act, I had a tall stovepipe hat and cape and all sorts of stuff. I think I was a pretty lousy magician, but I've always been interested in magic, and there's certainly a magic aspect to painting. My father would stop at this restaurant every morning for breakfast, and he met this woman who was a painter, and he arranged for me to take private art lessons at her home. I was drawing from nude models when I was 8 or 9 years old, which certainly made me the envy of the neighborhood. It wasn't really until I was around 11 or 12 that I think I ever went to an actual art museum. And I saw my first Jackson Pollock. I'd seen, I think, an article in Life, maybe the Jack the Dripper article or somewhere. But when I saw my first Jackson Pollock, and it was made with aluminum paint and gravel and tar and stuff, and I was just outraged. I thought, God, how could this be considered art? It just really offended me. Yet somehow, within a matter of days, I was dripping paint over all my figurative representational paintings. I was such a lousy student in high school that one of the roles that art played for me was that it always pulled my ass out of the fire. Even if I couldn't memorize the names and dates and I couldn't spit back the facts in an exam, I could make some extra credit mural or map or art project, which would at least show that I cared. My father died when I was 11, almost 12. I remember him getting up out of bed and falling, hitting his head on the bureau and lying in a pool of blood, and I couldn't lift him up. I couldn't get him up. It was a terrible image, which was literally the last time I saw him alive. I was very, very close to my father, and it was tough. On the other hand, one of the things that you learn when you lose someone like that at such an early age is that you will be happy again and that you can survive almost anything. But in terms of that kind of metaphor for a life falling apart, breaking into pieces, and then the need to restructure it and put it back together, I suppose it's a good analogy or metaphor for the kind of work that I do, deconstructing an image and then slowly, painstakingly putting it back together. But I don't know, I guess I would have to leave that to someone else to see whether or not that connection holds water. That's not particularly the way I think. I don't know why the blues make me so happy. thinking to make you sad.
Yes, sing your cause, lead 'em on. You know you cause me to leave my happy home.
Is this a great album or what? It's been out of print since the 50s. The painter who I learned the most from and copied the most was de Kooning. I just made so many de Koonings myself, I began to understand how a painting like that got built. I was de Kooning. I was a weak impersonation of him, but I was de Kooning. Then, of course, the problem was to purge him from my work, which took a long time. I moved forward by imposing limitations. When I moved to New York in the fall of '67, I began the first large-scale black and white work based on a photograph which used alternate methods of applying paint. I threw away all my tools, and I tried to equip myself with things with which I had no personal baggage, no great facility or skill, and I further purged my work by using only black paint on the white canvas so that I would have to make a decision early and live with it, and that I would not be able to endlessly paint in and paint out and change and scrape off, which was so associated with the working method that I'd used for so long as a junior abstract expressionist. Okay. All right, see you there. Are you guys waiting for me? Yeah. Okay, I gotta go because I'm being filmed.
Okay,
Can I talk to
so
you
this
later or
is,
tomorrow?
yeah, we're gonna get a little squeak here if we get too long, I don't think.
Okay, I've got very little time before my physical therapy stuff, so we're gonna okay, talk to you soon.
Did you have anybody in mind when you were painting, the first paintings that you sort of lay claim to?
I was very aware of certain people who kicked the door open for an intelligent, forward-looking kind of figuration that was not retardaire, was not reactionary, wasn't trying to breathe new life into shop-worn 19th century notions of figuration. Certainly Alex was one of those.
My instincts were all with figurative painting. My idea was to make basically a post-abstract figurative style. And it was problematic whether you could make a large-scale figurative painting. Hadn't been done. I mean, if it was done, it was like retro, sort of adapting the brushstrokes or something. But a really abstract, figurative thing it couldn't have been made without abstract painting because it uses the same grammar as abstract painting. When I started to paint perceptually, it was landscapes, actually. It was painting this way, direct, with no preparation, that I was able to get in contact with more of myself than I had previously. And I knew it was right, it just felt great. And that's why I decided to become a full-time painter and part-time everything else. I don't think a lot of people have optical experiences. They have with the perception of things. I think most of the way people see things is at this point is almost all through movies and media. And that's the last thing people see in my paintings is it's like the painting behind me is 3 p.m. in a field in August, and it's not July. The grass is almost all brown, and that's the color, and it's very specific. I think it's very difficult to grasp what you're looking at, and if I can get what I'm looking at, I'm very pleased. Chuck's work, when I first saw it, was initially amazing, that the way it could control the space in a room, from the up close to the back, and the magic working forward and backwards on it. I thought his show was one of the most sensational first shows I'd ever seen. The first show he had at Biker. I was making big heads, and then I saw his, and I thought that his first show was sensational.
I did like the fact that there was something from the life experience that everybody brought with them to the looking of these portraits that allowed for an entrance into the work that bypassed the normal kind of art world entrance into the work and allowed for people to react in a very visceral and personal way just to an image of another human being.
Chuck's work was always about making work, about how the work was made, and then the result was the image. So the image became a kind of carrier for an idea, the occasion for the work to take place. The images was something you looked at while you looked at the picture. It's about that old idea of form and content. And what our generation did is that we turned it around by introducing a very powerful concept, which was the concept of process. I recognized that the elements had to be highly reduced. The elements were so elaborate in themselves, then the process couldn't be revealed. I wasn't interested in melody or harmony or rhythm as such. I kind of got rid of them entirely. In music, structure takes the form of time. I was making pieces which were about structure and which the content was the structure. The music became about how we listen to the music. The way the piece reveals itself becomes the way that we listen. And there isn't anything else. By working with process, we were focusing on how work was made.
The concern was to try and make something that every square inch of the piece would be ultimately the same. That is, that there was no difference in technique to make background, hair, skin, or whatever.
The perceiver is a crucial part of the process. You have the work being performed, and then you have the audience. And the distance that between the two is a real distance. And it's the way we traverse that distance that creates the experience of looking at the work.
Likeness is an automatic byproduct of what I do. I am most aware while I'm making something that I am not making a head. I'm aware of the artificiality of the situation, that it's paint on a pigment distributed across a flat surface. The fact that it ultimately stacks up to build an image which has any relation to reality is mystifying to me.
The painting that took Chuck the longest is the painting he did of me.
It was also the goofiest of all the images.
I mean, one of the wonderful byproducts of being Chuck's friend is that he'd get a review in Artforum, for example, of the show that had that painting in it, and they'd say the painting is wonderful, but what an immensely goofy image this is. What possible kind of mind could be behind this, you know, this inane and pathetic image? So, you know, I'd be criticized while Chuck would be praised, and it was just, you know.
Taking a picture of yourself, I always said you.
Well, you didn't allow me to control my my
your
cheek. At
cheeks
least
in.
I had cheeks then.
It looked like real angry and intense. I allowed the real you.
Oh, it's the sweet and goofy, the trusting me.
Yes.
Yeah, and I've always hated that image. I mean, personally, not as a painting, but as a way of being, you know, remembered. The thing I like about painting is that it's a single image filled with sort of mystery and ambiguity. It confounds meaning on some level. I've always made work that was about the things of my life, sex, violence, whatever, the family, all the issues that still obsess and preoccupy me. They're not truly autobiographical. They're intended as fictions. They're intended as, you know, sort of unconscious allegories in some cases. But I think the feelings and the, you know, the emotions and the intensity is very much something that informs the work. I think I am picturing hell, or my own personal version of hell. There's a level of absurdity, there's a level of sort of over-the-topness. They're also intended to have a kind of radiance, if you will, some kind of transcendent element that, I don't know if it suggests hope, but it's, you know, maybe it suggests more hell coming in. You allow certain aspects of feeling to exist in your self-portraits that you wouldn't allow to exist in a Samaras or a...
No, I think I have a similar arm's length distance to my own work. In fact, I've often referred to me as him.
You don't think this is denial a little bit?
Probably. I used to not even call them portraits. I would refer to them as heads. And I adopted the mugshot for the very same reason the police use it. I always just wanted to present it in the most straightforward, flat-footed way.
Yeah.
Without editorial comment and without trying to crank it up for any particular psychological reading. But I do believe that the face is a roadmap of a person's life, and that there are indicators there of what kind of life he or she has led, and that if they've laughed their whole lives, they have laugh lines, and if they've frowned their whole lives, they have furrows on their brow. And the picture that I did of So I even call it a picture now, which I normally would have called it a painting. But the picture I did of my wife's grandmother, Fanny, was sort of the ultimate realization that what I was doing was, in fact, far more about the person than I had ever really realized myself.
Maggie was a baby. In fact, we held Maggie up in front of the camera. She was a few months old. And he did a thumbprint of her, a fingerprint of her from that shoot, from that day. So when I look at that image, I think of that we had that baby. So they have associations for me. You know, they're like almost like snapshots to me. They mark time.
The first color goes on and almost as a kind of stream of consciousness. If I always had the same color underneath, then the whole first part of the journey would be the same. But by having different colors underneath, it means that I'm always starting from a different point of departure. I know from just a lot of experience what these colors are going to read like from a distance. It's really the equivalent of a musical chord, that is, a series of strokes, when seen together, make a color world out of the component colors. Usually there are 5 or 6 or 7 colors in a square or a combination of squares. And I sort of slowly sneak up on the color I want. I'm not picking marks for any kind of resonance or any kind of emotional load or spin. The mark is simply what it is. Yet clusters of them stack up to make something that I hope has some kind of content beyond just the marks themselves. I aim for a kind of transcendence, not in any kind of great mystical capital T transcendence, but simply transcending its physical reality, that it becomes greater than the sum of the parts, that it is more than just marks on a flat surface, that it warps into a head, and the space of the painting begins to emerge.
One of the things that always struck me after you, I guess we call an injury, right? Your injury, how do we refer to you? The fact that
Event, we call it an event.
I mean, you've always taken pleasure in your career and being an artist in the community of artists in New York. But you never talked about the pleasure in the work itself. And you've talked about that so much since your injury.
I was talking to my assistant, Michael, yesterday, and he reminded me, because he was the person who first helped me try to paint in the basement of the hospital. And I had totally forgotten, but he said that every time I would paint, I would break down and cry and say, I can't do it, I can't get back, you know, whatever. But ultimately, you know, I finished that painting, and
it's a wonderful painting.
And then from then on, I think that there's been probably greater pleasure in the act of painting, and also painting ends up filling a larger portion of my time when I'm not being filmed. And that, you know, probably simply have more eggs in that basket. Yeah. But it has brought me real pleasure, and it's one of the only things that I can still do. And there's so many things that I used to love to do, like whack down brush and mow lawns and build things and dig and haul stuff and walk on the beach and roughhouse on the grass with my kids and swim in the ocean and stuff. Thank God, if there's only one thing that I can still do, it happens to be the thing that aside from my family and friends, means the most to me.
The garden was something that we did a lot together. one of the things that I really miss doing with him. I was leaving the apartment to meet him at the Pace Gallery Christmas party. Somebody was calling me from the emergency room, and I remember thinking it was just stress, at the worst, pneumonia or something like that. And when I got there, he was in tremendous distress, a lot of pain, and he had something that I think was like a seizure while I was standing there. And they gave him Valium for the pain. And he said immediately that he couldn't feel anything. And I remember questioning the nurses and being concerned, and the nurse said, "Oh, it's just from the Valium, from the pain, from the Valium." But he was paralyzed. They did this test and saw this occlusion of the spinal artery, and it's very, doctors are very strange. I guess it's very hard to give someone very bad news, but they don't really, they're very unclear and very indirect. You just sort of have to try to figure it out. They described what they found, but they didn't. But I could tell from the look on their face that it was really bad. But when Chuck was going to go to Rusk, which is the rehab hospital attached to NYU, Mark Greenwald and I went on a little tour of Rusk into what was as close to hell on earth as I can imagine. All of these adults with brain injuries and spinal cord injuries and strokes, and their grieving families. And Mark and I just looked at each other and started bawling, just started crying. And I think that was really when I started to understand what had really happened to him. And he was at Rusk for about 7 months. I followed the occupational therapist down to the cafeteria one day. She was a lovely woman, really. She was wonderful. Her name was Phyllis Palsgrove. And Chuck was still very sick. He couldn't sit up without his blood pressure dropping so low that he was, in danger of becoming unconscious. He had all sorts of physical problems. Still, everything was not working. And, but I said, this man is not meant to string beads on pipe cleaners. You have to give him a brush and paint and pencils as soon as possible. Figure out some way for him to work, because he just needed to reassure himself. So she did, and we set up a whole studio in Rusk Institute, and he could work just, a little bit at a time. But it was really essential for him to start again. He made an amazing painting while he was at Rusk, painting of Alex.
me cold and hand. When the hate gets so bad, but you love with another man, I wanna know, baby, I wanna know. Yes, I wanna know, Mama, just what in the world I done wrong. She left me feeling blue, heartbroken and worried. Well, nothing I did, just something that woman heard. I wanna know. Oh yes, I wanna know. Yes, I wanna know. What in the world did I do wrong? Wherever you are, baby, please listen to my plea. Pack up your clothes and come on home to me. Well, I wanna know. Oh, yes, I wanna know. Yes, you know, I wanna know, baby. Oh, what in the world did I do wrong?
I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how these particular artists and the work they do figures in your aesthetic cosmology.
I got used to thinking about images of fellow artists for whom I have a real sense of connectedness, not necessarily first and foremost a close personal friendship, but some kind of connection that comes through the work or a dialogue that's already established or might be established. And I used it most frequently as an excuse to get to know some people that I wished that I knew in an attempt to establish a dialogue with another generation of people who are making images.
Decorative arts are the biggest, sort of source for me of my work. Just objects from daily life, just how people make the world beautiful, put the world together. I have no idea why I made any body stuff to begin with. I just started one day doing it. It was the most close way that I could make representation about my life. It was the closest language that I could find, and one that seemed endlessly possible to explore. When my sister died, I felt like I loved her form as much as I loved her personality, and that when you sort of separate those two, both start disintegrating, become more fleeting or something. Shows her little utopian environment you can make. It's like making dollhouse arrangements. You get to make this like perfect equation or something for yourself just for one given moment, and then it all goes, sort of falls apart and goes in different directions.
My hands don't work anymore.
Your hands probably don't fit it
Yeah, it's going to be
anymore
a
either.
quadriplegic puppet that doesn't, where his
Yeah.
hands don't work. Okay, stick his head
Oh,
on.
super. This was in your, like, storage or in your mother's?
Well, actually, when my mother died, this stuff was in her basement.
How long ago did she die, your mother?
She died in 1980.
And then you went and got all your things at home? In Washington, she
Yeah.
did? Yeah, but they're amazing, good condition to have.
My father made me a wonderful puppet stage. And my mother made the curtain, one of those, it's like the Metropolitan Opera or something that it was, my aunt was in the funeral business, so she worked at a casket company. So I got all the silks and satins and velvets from her. And I had this silk curtain that would rise like it was the Metropolitan Opera. And then my little puppets would.
Did you have brothers and sisters or
No,
something?
only
Just
child.
you?
No, the whole thing was to entertain the troops. I know that the reason that I made puppets and did magic shows and ultimately became an artist was largely because I had learned that if you were entertaining, you could have friends, and that if you did something that the kids liked, they would hang around you. So I did puppet shows and magic acts and drew.
Chuck's work is strange because it, you know, even if you don't know the people, it does tell you lots of things about the people in a very intimate way. It is a sort of enormously vulnerable situation to be in, having people looking, you know, through your pores into your body.
There's a tendency in the art world to think that it's every man for himself or every woman for themselves, and if there are groups to be considered, then it's groups that are rigidly brought around one idea. And Chuck, again, is somebody who has a very broad view, and he's able to recognize the work of somebody like Dorothy Rockburn, who makes rather sublime abstract paintings, at the same time that he can be interested in Cadmus, who made very tough but also very comical and somewhat grotesque social paintings and erotic paintings in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. Cadmus is an artist who, like a number of artists of his generation, tried to find a contemporary way to use classical and Baroque art in which volumes were represented in deep space, in which dramatic lighting was a factor, and so on. A lot of Chuck's early paintings occupy a very, very shallow space. In this case, there is a deep space of a kind you might find in a Baroque period or, 18th, 19th century portrait with deep darks and strong highlights and so on. And in a way, it looks like an almost more old-fashioned pictures than some of the others. But when you get right on top of it, you realize that all of that explodes, and it explodes into fragments which have very, very strange other connotations. For example, the way in which this kind of linkage of two can become a kind of mini abstraction of one kind, or this over here looks like a sort of explosion of little Kenneth Nolan paintings or Jasper Johns paintings. There are other things as well, though, that the color here is almost as designer colors. There are these very soft yellows and beiges and oranges. It's a very delicate, almost a pretty palette, injected into a situation which has all the attributes of a hard, strong, dramatic contrast of an older style of painting. And you see here this way of sort of putting together plates of color and nesting decorative motifs one into the other, which brings up Klimt. So suddenly you have a picture where you might have a little Rembrandt, you might have a little Klimt, you might have a little Paul Cadmus himself, and all of it is synthesized through a system which is absolutely and totally Chuck's own.
Dorothea Rockman has I think a really incredibly interesting face. Extremely pale eyes with these dark centers that came from the way she was lit, and her eyes would open up while the modeling lights were on the strobes, and then strobe would snap so fast that her eyes wouldn't have a chance to close completely tight, the irises. When Dorothea talks to me about her work, it's so different from the way I think about my own. She's a painter involved with mathematics and the cosmos.
One of the reasons I'm interested so much in astronomy is that when I see the pictures from Hubble, I feel like I'm looking at a mode of creation which is something recognizable to me from having been a creator all my life. I understand completely what's going on. The name of that work is Universes. At the moment when I was working on that, I had come to the conclusion that there was more than one universe. The idea was so radical. But I'm an artist, what the hell, you know? I can do what I want. So I thought that I would do this work which implied that there's more than one universe and that universes can cannibalize each other. Now, this is considered the truth. Very few people have gotten past Matisse in terms of the figure. And I'm always interested in pushing the parameters of every area. And he was clearly doing that, treating the head as a continent of art.
Funding for this program has been provided by Additional funding was provided by
This is PBS.